1. The unlikely hero. Picture this: a man born into slavery in Mecca, an African man in a society where he was considered the lowest of the low. No wealth, no freedom, no power, and yet this man becomes one of the most respected voices in human history. That's Bilal ibn Rabah. His story flipped the script on what greatness really means. 2. The power of faith under fire. They tortured him. They dragged him through the scorching desert sand. They put heavy rocks on his chest, crushing him, trying to break him. And every single time, his response was just one word: Ahad, one. Meaning one God. Imagine that strength. No army, no weapons, just unshakable belief. That's real power. 3. From chains to the minaret. Here's the twist. The very man once chained as a slave was chosen to be the first voice to call people to prayer. The first Muezzin. His voice wasn't just sound, it was freedom echoing across a city. That call wasn't just religious ritual, it was a declaration that dignity doesn't come from status or skin color. It comes from truth. 4. Breaking barriers of race and status in a world divided by tribes, status, and bloodlines, Bilal stood out. An African man, once enslaved, standing shoulder to shoulder with leaders, generals, and scholars. His life was living proof that Islam wasn't just about rituals, it was about breaking barriers and lifting the oppressed. That message, timeless. 5. Legacy of a voice that never faded. Think about it. Centuries later, billions still hear his story. That same call to prayer that first echoed from his lips is still ringing out from minarets around the world. His voice didn't just echo across Mecca, it echoed across time. And that's the kind of impact we all dream of leaving behind. All right, so let's set the stage. You've got this guy, Bilal ibn Rabah, and here's the crazy part. If you looked at his situation from the outside, back in Mecca, you'd say, yeah, this guy doesn't stand a chance. The world's stacked against him. Born into slavery, treated as property, not even considered a full person by the society he lived in. And yet, he ends up becoming one of the most powerful voices in human history. That's the twist. That's the beauty of this story. Think about how society works. We tend to celebrate people who come from privilege: the kings, the warriors, the celebrities, the leaders born into money and power. That's who history usually remembers, right? But Bilal flips the whole script. He's got none of that. No fancy lineage, no army behind him, no wealth, nothing. What he did have was this raw, unshakable belief, and a voice that carried something deeper than just sound. It carried truth. Now, picture Mecca at that time. It's not like the bustling city you know today. It was tribal, brutal, and the hierarchy was crystal clear. Arabs of noble families sat at the top. Slaves. They were at the absolute bottom. And Bilal wasn't just any slave, he was African in a society that looked down on outsiders, especially people of darker skin. He's starting off life with every single disadvantage stacked against him. If life were a video game, this guy's playing on the hardest difficulty setting with 0 cheats. But here's the thing about stories like his. Greatness doesn't always come from comfort or privilege. Sometimes it comes from the deepest kind of struggle. It's forged in pain, in resistance, in never giving up when the world's literally sitting on your chest. And that's Bilal's story. So the question is, how does a man in that position rise up and become one of the most respected names in history? That's where it gets epic. His character wasn't built in palaces or battlefields. It was built in the desert sand, under the whip, under the chain. And instead of breaking him, that suffering made him unbreakable. Here's the metaphor that comes to mind. If you put the softest metal into fire, it melts, it bends. But if you put iron into fire and keep hammering it, shaping it, you end up with steel. Stronger than it was before. That's Bilal. His life in slavery wasn't just hardship, it was the fire that forged his strength. The reason why when truth came his way, he was ready to embrace it fully, no hesitation. And here's what really hits me. People probably didn't even notice him at first. He wasn't a leader, He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't commanding troops or running tribes. He was just there, invisible to the people in power. And that invisibility makes his rise even more powerful. It's like the world thought, this guy's nobody, but the universe knew, just wait, you're about to hear a voice that will change history. What I love about this part of the story is how it challenges the way we think about worth. Society says your worth comes from your bank account, your last name, the color of your skin, or the people you know. But Bilal, he proves that worth can come from something much deeper: your resilience, your faith, your ability to stand tall when life keeps pushing you down. And that's why he's the unlikely hero. Because no one, not his masters, not the tribes of Mecca, not the people who mocked him, could have guessed that this man, this so-called nobody, would go on to have a voice that billions would remember. So when you hear his story, it's not just history, it's a reminder that the people society overlooks might actually be the ones carrying the deepest truth, that the person everyone counts out could be the one who defines what real courage looks like. And that's the setup. From slavery, from invisibility, from a position of zero power, Bilal rises, not because of wealth, not because of politics, but because of something you can't chain down: belief, resilience, and a voice that carried beyond his time. All right, let's get real for a second. It's one thing to say you believe in something when life's good, when the bills are paid, when you've got food on the table and people clapping for you. That's easy. But when the heat gets turned up, when you're stripped of every comfort, when the world is literally trying to break you, that's when you find out if belief is real or just lip service. And this is where Bilal's story gets insane. He wasn't just challenged, he was tortured brutally. Imagine being dragged out into the desert in the middle of the day. We're talking about heat that can melt the soles off your sandals, the kind of heat that makes the ground feel like burning coals. They throw him down on that sand, his back against it, skin blistering instantly, like a frying pan. Then, as if that isn't enough, they roll a massive stone onto his chest. Not a pebble, not a rock, a boulder so heavy it presses the air out of his lungs, crushing him slowly. And then they start screaming at him, give it up, denounce your faith, go back to the old gods. Now stop right there. Most of us, honestly, we'd tap out. You'd beg, you'd cry, you'd say whatever they wanted just to get that weight off your chest. That's human instinct, survive, but Bilal, he doesn't beg, he doesn't fold, he doesn't even argue. Instead, he says one word, Ahad, over and over, Ahad meaning one. One God, think about that. No long speeches, no negotiations, no explanations. Just one word, one truth, and he says it with so much conviction. It's like the pain doesn't even matter. His body is chained, crushed, beaten, but his soul, untouchable. And here's the part that blows my mind. This isn't stubbornness for the sake of stubbornness. This is clarity. He's staring death in the face, and he's saying, even if I die right now, you're not shaking me off this truth. That's next level strength. That's not muscles. That's not weapons, that's inner steel. It makes you think, where does that kind of strength even come from? Because most people, when they're under that kind of pressure, they break. We live in a world where people lose their minds if their phone battery dies or if their Wi-Fi cuts out. Bilal's lying under a rock in the desert, ribs cracking, and he's chanting Ahad. That's a whole different spectrum of resilience, and it wasn't just about him surviving torture. His resistance was a message. Every time he said Ahad, it wasn't just defiance to his masters. It was a declaration to anyone watching that faith isn't just about what you say in private. It's about what you're willing to endure in public. His pain was proof. Proof that belief in one God was stronger than chains, stronger than fire, stronger than death. Now, here's the kicker. His masters thought they were breaking him down, but really, they were building him up. Every lash, every burn, every stone pressed onto his chest was carving his name deeper into history, because courage like that people don't forget it. His tormentors probably thought, this is just one slave, we'll crush him and move on. But instead, what they did was make him a symbol, a walking, breathing embodiment of unshakable faith. And that's why his story still hits so hard, because it raises the uncomfortable question, what do we actually stand for? Like if everything was stripped away, your comfort, your freedom, even your life, what's the one word you'd hold onto no matter what? Bilal had his answer, Ahad, one God, and he didn't just whisper it. He screamed it against the sand, against the whips, against the boulders on his chest. That's the power of faith under fire. Not just believing when it's easy, but holding your ground when it costs you everything. And here's the irony, the people torturing him thought they had all the power. They had the chains, the weapons, the social status. But in the end, the guy pinned under a rock was stronger than all of them. Because real power isn't about control, it's about conviction. And Bilal showed the world that day what unbreakable conviction really looks like. Here's where the story flips from tragedy to triumph. You've got this man who spent his early life in chains, treated as property, mocked, beaten, dismissed as less than. And yet, he's the one chosen to stand up in front of an entire community and make the very first call to prayer in Islam. Think about the symbolism there. That's not just a promotion, that's a revolution. Let's slow it down. Imagine the scene, the city of Medina, a brand, new community being built. The Prophet and his followers are establishing something fresh, something built on justice, equality, and faith. And now they need a voice literally to call people together, to announce prayer, to set the rhythm of daily life. They could have picked anyone, a respected elder, a wealthy supporter, one of the warriors, someone with status. But instead, they picked Bilal, the former slave, the man who once lay in the desert with a rock crushing his chest. That moment is huge. It's saying, we don't measure people by the world's standards anymore. We measure them by their faith, their resilience, their truth. A guy who society said was worth nothing, suddenly elevated to one of the most honored positions in the community. That's bigger than just a role, that's a message to the world. Now, think about his voice. This wasn't just about volume. His voice carried weight because of his story. When Bilal climbed up to that rooftop or minaret and called out, Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest, it wasn't just sound waves. It was freedom. It was proof. It was like every note was saying, you tried to bury me, you tried to silence me, but here I am, and my voice is carrying across the city. And here's something powerful. That first call to prayer wasn't just for the believers standing there. It was for history, because from that day on, 5 times a day, every single day, for over 400 years, billions of people have been hearing that same call, and it all started with him. A man who used to be a slave, now becoming the voice of Islam. If that's not a mic drop moment, I don't know what is. What makes it even more amazing is the psychology of it. Imagine if you had been tortured, beaten, humiliated. A lot of people would carry that trauma forever. They'd feel broken, maybe bitter, but Bilal, he takes that pain and turns it into power. Every time he calls out, it's a reminder, you couldn't break me. His chains became his fuel, and that's the beauty of it. It's not just a personal victory, it's symbolic. Because that first call to prayer wasn't only announcing worship, it was announcing a new way of life. A society where your skin color doesn't determine your worth, where your past doesn't chain your future, where truth can raise you higher than any title or fortune. Think about the people who heard that first Adhan. Some of them probably remembered him from the old days. They'd seen him in chains, they'd seen him tortured, and now they're hearing his voice echoing from the rooftops, calling them to God. That must have sent chills down their spine. It's like watching an underdog rise in a way no one saw coming. The voice they once tried to silence became the voice guiding their prayers, and it doesn't stop there. His role as the first Muezzin wasn't just ceremonial, it was identity shaping. That call became part of the DNA of Islam, something so central that you can't imagine the faith without it. And at the root of it, there's this man who once lived in chains, now elevated so high that his voice still resonates across centuries. So when you hear the Adhan today, echoing across cities, villages, deserts, and mountains, you're not just hearing words. You're hearing history. You're hearing resilience. You're hearing the echo of a man who went from the lowest point in society to becoming the voice that billions still follow. From chains to the minaret, that's not just a journey, that's a legacy. Here's the thing about history. Most of the time, it's written by the winners. Kings, generals, dynasties, the people with the power. And usually, those stories don't leave much room for outsiders. But this story, it's the opposite. It's about a man who wasn't born into privilege, who wasn't even free at the start of his life, and yet he ends up breaking through every barrier society tried to put in front of him. Let's be real. 7th century Arabia was tribal to the core. Your worth was measured by your bloodline, your wealth, your connections. If you didn't have the right family or the right skin color, you were pretty much invisible. And if you were a slave, forget it. You were basically treated like furniture, something people owned and used. Now add to that the fact that he was African in a society that saw outsiders as second class. By every social metric of the time, he was at the bottom. And yet, this same man ends up being one of the closest companions of the Prophet, standing shoulder to shoulder with leaders, warriors, scholars, and visionaries. That's not just impressive, that's revolutionary. Because think about it. Even today, we live in a world obsessed with status. Who's got the biggest house, the fanciest car, the highest follower count? But back then, status wasn't just about ego, it was survival. If you weren't part of the right tribe, you had no protection, no safety net. And still, he rose up, not by chasing power, not by chasing wealth, but by embodying something deeper: faith, loyalty, courage. What's crazy is how the new Muslim community flipped the script. Suddenly, lineage didn't matter. Your tribe didn't matter. Skin color didn't matter. What mattered was your heart, your belief, your actions. And he became the living proof of that message. Here's a mental image. Picture the Prophet surrounded by some of the most respected men of the time, people with influence, leaders of tribes, brilliant minds. And right there, in that same circle, sits a man who once had shackles on his wrists, not as a servant, not as a background figure, but as an equal. That's a radical statement in any era. And let's not sugarcoat it, not everyone liked it. There were people who struggled with it, who couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that this African man, once enslaved, was now being honored and respected in ways they thought only belonged to their elite class. But that's the point. His presence exposed the hypocrisy of the old system. It forced people to confront their own prejudices, and he didn't just sit quietly in the back. He became a symbol. Every time he stepped up to call people to prayer, it was like a declaration. This community is different. We don't play by the old rules. Here, the oppressed can rise, the marginalized can lead, and dignity belongs to everyone. That's why his story still hits today. Because racism, classism, the obsession with status, those aren't ancient problems. We're still dealing with them right now, and his life becomes this timeless counterpoint. A reminder that real worth isn't tied to the color of your skin or the money in your pocket. It's tied to your character, your conviction, your truth. And here's the wild part. In a world where most people are forgotten after a generation or two, his name has lasted for over 1,400 years. Not because of wealth, not because of power, but because he broke the mold, because he stood as living evidence that the labels society sticks on you don't define you unless you let them. So when we talk about breaking barriers, it's not just some motivational tagline. It's real, it's gritty, it's about a man who climbed out of the pit society threw him in, and then turned around and showed the world that those walls of race and status, they're not unbreakable. They crumble in the face of truth. Here's the thing about voices, most of them fade. You hear someone shout, sing, argue, or cry, and then the sound is gone. It disappears into the air like it never existed. But some voices, they outlive the body, they ripple through time, and this story is about one of those voices. When he first climbed up and made that call to prayer, it wasn't just noise bouncing off the walls of Medina. It was history being carved into the fabric of human memory. That first Adhan wasn't just summoning people to line up for prayer, it was summoning humanity to something bigger. And the crazy part is, we're still hearing the echo today. Think about it. 400 years later, that same call to prayer he gave is still being recited 5 times a day, across every continent. In cities, villages, mountains, deserts, even from mosques tucked between skyscrapers in the middle of Manhattan or London. His voice, his role, became the seed of something that never stopped growing. Billions of people wake up, pause their day, and move with that rhythm. That's not just a legacy, that's immortality. And here's what makes it even more powerful. He didn't leave behind libraries of books. He didn't leave behind castles or monuments with his name carved into the stone. What he left was a sound, a simple human voice carrying a truth. And somehow, that ended up being more eternal than any palace or fortune ever could be. Now imagine the irony here. His masters once tried to silence him, to crush him into the sand, to make him invisible. And yet his voice became one of the loudest in human history. That's cosmic justice right there. The very people who thought they had erased him ended up being erased by time. But his voice, still here, and it's not just the sound itself, it's what it represents. Every Adhan, every call to prayer, is like a reminder of his story. A reminder that no matter how deep the chains cut, no matter how heavy the rock on your chest, truth has a way of rising. His voice became a torch passed through generations, lighting the way for billions who never even knew his face. What I love most is how his legacy wasn't built on conquest or bloodshed. It wasn't about tearing people down. It was about lifting people up. His voice called people to something greater than themselves, to unity, to worship, to a rhythm of life that made everyone stop and remember what really matters. That's not power in the way empires think about power, that's influence on a soul level. And here's the kicker: voices shape culture. They inspire revolutions, they bring comfort, they start movements. But most of those fade after a few decades, maybe a century if they're lucky. This one. It's eternal. It's like time itself couldn't put it out. That's when you realize this wasn't just a human legacy, it was divine timing. A man with nothing becomes the man whose voice sets the cadence for an entire faith. So when you hear the call to prayer today, echoing across rooftops or floating through a busy street, don't just hear it as sound, hear it as history, hear it as resilience, hear it as the echo of a man who went from chains to eternal memory. His voice didn't just last, it became part of the heartbeat of the world. And that's the lesson. Most of us worry about being remembered. We stress about legacy, about leaving our mark. But the truth is, it's not about building something flashy or forcing your name into history books. It's about living with so much conviction, so much truth, that your voice, literal or symbolic, never fades. That's what he did, and that's why his legacy will outlast all of us. So when you step back and look at the whole arc of his life, it's wild. You've got this man who starts off at the absolute bottom, chained, beaten, dismissed as nothing. And through nothing but conviction, resilience, and truth, he rises to become a symbol, not just in his lifetime, but for every generation that followed. That's the power of his story. It's not just history, it's a mirror. It forces us to ask, what do we stand for? What's the one word we'd hold on to if everything was ripped away? Most of us won't face torture in a desert, but we do face struggles, doubts, fears, temptations, pressure to compromise. And his story reminds us that even when the world's weight is crushing down, you can still hold your ground. He went from chains to the minaret, from invisibility to being the voice that billions still follow. He shattered barriers of race, class, and status, proving that dignity isn't handed down by society, it's forged inside you. And his legacy didn't fade with his last breath. It echoes 5 times a day, every day, across every corner of the planet. That's bigger than history. That's timeless. So if there's one takeaway, it's this: your circumstances don't define you. Your pain doesn't end you. The world can try to chain your body, but it can't chain your soul if you refuse to give it up. His voice still calls us to remember that truth. And maybe, just maybe, the challenge for us today is to find our own voice. That thing inside us that can outlast the noise, that stands tall no matter the fire, and that leaves behind something greater than ourselves. Because in the end, his life wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation, about proving that the most unlikely hero can become the loudest echo in history. And that echo, it's still ringing.